Good morning, everybody. We're back to Monday. I can't believe that we are in the final 2 weeks of school. Yeah, it's gonna be a weird transition to summer, given how the school ended. Ooh, there's a little bug on my table. Ugh, gross. Ugh. But I just want to say that, even when school ends, you have to know that I will always be here for you. I'm always in your camp. I'm always here to help you out. All right, here we go. We are reading Refugee. We are currently today reading 16 and 17. 16 goes back to Joseph's story, and then 17 back to Isabel's story. When we left Joseph, remember he is the Jewish refugee who is currently on the ship headed hopefully to Cuba, but apparently there's other ships also headed to Cuba, and because they're trying to escape the German, so the Holocaust that was in Eastern Europe under Hitler rule. Hitler started a campaign to exterminate or kill off all Jews, and it wasn't just Jewish people, it was also Roman people or Romas, people of color, disabled people, people who were homosexual, so twins even, so here we are. Joseph. Somewhere on the Atlantic Ocean, 1939, 10 days from home. Joseph followed the small group of kids through the raised doorway onto the bridge of the St. Louis. The bridge was a narrow, curving room that stretched from one side of the ship to the other. Bright sunlight streamed in through 24 windows, offering a panoramic view of the vast blue Atlantic and the wispy white clouds. Throughout the wood-decked room were metal benches with maps and rulers on them, and the walls were dotted with mysterious gauges and meters made of shining brass. There were a number of crewmen on the bridge, some of them wearing blue and white sailor uniforms like the stewards, and 3 more in brass-buttoned blue jackets with gold bands at the cuffs, and blue officer caps with gold trim. One of the regular sailors stood at a spoked steering wheel, the size of a truck tire, with handles sticking out all around it. It looked like the steering wheels Joseph had seen in paintings of pirate ships, but this one was metal and connected to a big rectangular pedestal. The shortest of the 3 men in fancy uniforms strode over to the group with a big smile on his face. Joseph recognized him from the Isabelles service. "Welcome to the bridge, boys and girls," he said. "I'm Captain Schroeder." The captain shook each of their hands, even though none of them were older than 13. One of the parents on board of the ship had arranged for a tour of the bridge in the engine room for any children who wanted to attend, and 8 of them had signed up. Ruthie and Evelyn hadn't been interested, but Renata was there, along with a few of the older kids. Captain Schroeder introduced them to the first officer and the other crew on the bridge and showed them what some of the gauges and dials meant. Joseph listened eagerly. "This is what the engine control for the St. Louis, Captain Schroeder explained. "When we change speeds, we grip these handles, slide them all the way forward, and then pull them back to a new setting," he smiled. "I'm not going to change the speed now because we've got the engine set right where we want them." Joseph noticed both handles were set to a head full. "Are we going full speed because we're racing 2 other ships to China?" Joseph asked. The captain looked surprised and then a little angry. "Where did you hear that we were racing other ships to Cuba?" he asked Joseph. "2 stewards were talking about it the other day," Joseph said, feeling a little nervous. "They said if we don't make it there first, they might not let us in." The captain pursed his lips and glanced meaningfully at the first officer, who looked concerned. The captain turned his smile again. "We're not in any kind of race," he said, looking from Joseph to the other kids. "We're just trying to make the best possible speed because we have calm seas and a following wind. You have nothing to worry about. Now perhaps Petty Officer Jockle will show you the engine room." As high as the bridge was on the ship, the engine room was far down below. After stepping through a steel fire door that said crew only painted in big letters, Joseph and the tour group went down the staircase after staircase, and they still weren't to the engine room yet. Below the docks was very different from what Joseph was used to above docks. Everything on A, B, and C decks was airy and comfortable. There were no portholes here, no spacious cabins. The air was damp and smelt of cigarettes and cabbage and sweat. Ew. Peeking into the rooms, Joseph could see that the crew quarters below decks had 2 beds to a room and barely enough space to turn around. The hallways were narrow and the ceilings were low. Petty Officer Jockle had to duck as they went through the doorways. Joseph had never been afraid of tight places before, but the close living conditions made him uneasy. He felt like he was visiting an alien world. The 7 other kids must have felt the same way because they were all silent, even Renata. From down the hall came the sound of men singing, and Petty Officer Jockle slowed. As they got closer, Joseph recognized the tune. It was the Horst Wessel song, an anthem of the Nazi Party. Joseph's skin crawled, and he and the other kids looked at each other nervously. Joseph had heard the Horst Wessel song hundreds of times in the weeks following his father's abduction. It had gone overnight from an obscure song the Nazis sang at rallies to an unofficial national anthem of Germany, and it was frightening. So this is a memory moment. Joseph had heard the Horst Wessel song hundreds of times in the week following his father's abduction. So this is a memory moment we're living, because we're living in this really scary time for Joseph and other Jewish people, where, this song that was a German song of the past became like a rallying song for Nazi soldiers to do violence and damage against Jewish people. So he's remembering that because he's connecting it to this moment. And what this is making him realize is that whoever's singing that song is not on their side. The last time Joseph had heard the song was the day every one of his neighbors had lined the street to salute as Nazi soldiers marched by. Petty Officer Jockle tried to slip the children past the little common room where the crewmen were drinking and singing, but suddenly someone in the room called, "Stop! Passengers aren't allowed down here." Jockle froze, and so did Joseph. Someone's doing yard work at 7:57 in the morning. Jockle froze, and so did Joseph. One of the men got up from the table, a scowl on his face. He was the thickest man with a bulbous nose, bulldog cheeks, and dark, heavy eyebrows. Joseph knew that face from somewhere. Had he been their steward at dinner, set up their beds one night? No, Joseph remembered. It was the man he had seen on the balcony the morning of the Shabbos service. The man who had been angry that the portrait of Hitler had been taken down and removed. The man staggered a little, bumping into things as he tried to move around the tight little room. Joseph had seen drunk people leaving pubs in Berlin the same way. Good morning, Lily.
Good morning.
I'm making a video right now for school. Is Colby up or is she still sleeping?
She's still sleeping.
She's still sleeping?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to come, you have to come around on the grass and come this way. The man staggered. Oh, sorry. The captain has given these children special permission to visit the engine room. Schwindick. That's a great name. Petty Officer told him. The captain, Schwindick said, his voice dripping with disapproval. Even from where Joseph said he could smell alcohol on his breath. Are you going to sit? It's a little cold out here, okay? Are you going to sit and listen to story time?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, Jockle said, straightening. The captain. On the wall of the common room, Joseph saw bulletin boards with Nazi slogans and headlines from a rabidly anti-Jewish newspaper, Der Dummer, pinned to it. he felt a sliver of fear. Jewish rats, Schweindick said, staring at Joseph and the other kids. Many of them, I know, looked at their shoes, and even Joseph looked away, trying not to draw the big man's attention. Joseph clenched his fists, and his ears burned hot with frustration and embarrassment at the helplessness. After a few tense moments, Schwindick staggered back to his seat, the threat of the captain's rank still worth something, even so far away from the bridge. Petty Officer Jokel hurried the children along, and Schwindick and his friends broke into another Nazi song even louder than before. Joseph heard them singing. When Jewish blood flows from the knife, things will go much better. Before Jokel ushered them down another flight of stairs, Joseph's legs felt weak, and he clung to the railing. He thought they had escaped all of this on the St. Louis, but the hatred had followed them even here to the middle of the ocean. With its huge diesel engines and generators and dials and pumps and switches, the engine room should have been fascinating, but Joseph had a hard time getting excited about it. None of the other children were excited either, not after what had happened with Schwindick. The tour ended solemnly, and Petty Officer Jokel returned them to the surface, being careful to take them back by a different route. It was a different world below decks, Joseph thought, a world outside the magic little bubble he and the other Jews lived in above the decks of the MS St. Louis. Here, below the decks, was a real world. So we can log this as an aha moment. It was a different world below decks, Joseph thought. He's having this moment of realization that there is still racism aboard the ship, that they have not escaped the racism, that it's still there. It's just hidden below decks. All right, we are moving on to chapter 17, which brings us back to Isabel's story. We left Isabel and the crew on their boat leaving Cuba, kind of on a happy moment. The grandfather of the boat was hitting on the girlfriend of Luis's older brother. They were dancing and singing. So here we go, back to Isabel's story. Isabel, the Straits of Florida, somewhere north of Cuba, 1994, one day from home. Isabel watched as Papi, Senor Castillo, Luis, and Amara huddled over the boat engine, trying to figure out why it wouldn't start. Oh yeah, that's right. The boat, the engine just stopped in the middle of, like, the ocean. It had something to do with overheating, Senor Castillo had said. Amara was pouring seawater over it, trying to cool it. Meanwhile, Ivan and Isabel had been tasked with scooping the water back out of the bottom of the boat. The sock stuffed into the bullet hole was soaked through, and it was drip, drip, dripped water into Castillo's face at the bottom of the boat like a leaky faucet. They had been drifting north in the Gulf Stream with the motor silent for more than an hour now, and no one was singing or dancing or laughing anymore. Ahead of Isabel, her mother and Senor Castillo slept against each other on a narrow bench at the front of the boat where the prow came to a point. Lido sat on the middle bench right above Isabel and Ivan. "We do have family in Miami," Isabel's grandfather told her as she and Ivan worked. "When the news lady asked if you had family in El Norte, you said no, but you do," Lido said. "My brother, Guillermo." Isabel and Ivan looked up at each other in surprise. "I didn't know you had a brother," Isabel said to her grandfather. "He left in the airlifts in the 1970s, the Freedom Flights, when the U.S. airlifted political dissidents off the island," Lido exclaimed. "But Guillermo was no dissident. He just wanted to live in the U.S. I could have gone too. I was a police officer once, like Luis and Amara. Did you know that? Back before Castro, when Batista was president." Isabel knew that, and that Lido had lost his job during the revolution and had been set to cut cane in the fields instead. "I could have pulled strings," Lido said, "called in favors, gotten me and your grandmother off this island. Then you would have been born in El Norte," Ivan told Isabel. She paused in her scooping, thinking about how different her life might have been now. Born in the United States, it's almost inconceivable. We stayed because Cuba was our home, Lido said. I didn't want to leave when Castro took office in 1959. I didn't leave when the U.S. sent planes in 1970s, and I didn't leave in the 80s when all the people sailed out of Muriel Harbor. Lido shook his head at the tight cluster of people whirring over the engine at the back of the boat and thumped his fist against the side. It was a mistake. Leaving on the sinking coffin. I should have stayed put. All of us should have. How is Cuba worse than it ever was? We always have been beholden to someone else. First it was Spain, then it was the U.S., then it was Russia. First Batista, then Castro. We should have waited. Things change. They always change. But do they get better? Ivan said. Isabel thought that this was a good question. All her life things have only been getting worse. First the Soviet Union collapsing, then her parents fighting, then her father trying to leave, then her grandmother dying. She waited for Lido to tell her different, to tell her that things would get better, but he looked out at the black water instead. Isabella and Ivan shared a glance. Lido's silence was answer enough. So we can log this as a memory moment. The quote, Isabella thought it was a good question. All her life things had only gotten worse. So we know that she's living in memories. And then, so it's kind of like again and again, because the sentence structure is really short, right? The author is using sentence structure for again and again really short, and kind of going like it makes it read through a list of what is bad in her life, but it's also a memory moment thinking about her reflecting on her life, about all how it's progressively got worse. So first the list, right? Soviet Union collapsing, her parents started fighting, her father trying to leave multiple times, and then her grandmother dying. Someone would have done something, Lido said at last, but we should have waited. But they are going to arrest Papi, said Isabel. I know you love your father, Shabella, but he's a fool. Isabella's cheeks burned hot with anger and embarrassment. She loved Lido, and she loved her Papi too. But even worse, he was saying these things in front of her best friend. She glanced quickly at Ivan. He kept his eyes on his work, pretending not to have heard. But they were right at Lido's feet. He could hear everything, and Lido wasn't finished. He's risking his life for us. He's risking your life and your mother's life and his unborn child's life. And for what? Lido asked. He doesn't even know. He can't say. Ask him why he wants to go to the States, and all he can say is freedom. That's not a plan. How is he going to put a roof over your head and food on your table any better than he did in Cuba? Lido raised his eyebrows at Isabel. He's taking you away from who you are, what you are. How are you ever going to learn to count clave in Miami? The U.S. has no soul. In Havana, you would have learned it with even trying. Clave is the hidden heartbeat of the people, beneath whatever song Batista or Castro is playing. Oh, hush, Papi, Isabel's mother said sleepily. She had been awake long enough to hear them after all, and at least the last part. Miami is just North Cuba. Mommy shifted and went back to sleep, but Isabel worried that Lido was right. She had never been able to count clave, and she had always assumed it would come to her eventually. The rhythms of her homeland would one day whisper its secret into her soul. But would she ever hear it now? Like trading her trumpet, she had swapped one thing that was really hers, her music, for the chance to keep her family together. So we can log that as a tough question. Like trading her trumpet, she had swapped the one thing that was really hers, her music, for a chance to keep her family together. So she's, this is a memory moment, tough question. Because she's asking herself about, like, sacrificing what she sacrificed in order to keep her family together versus sacrificing, like, her being, right? She loves playing music, so sacrificing her being. We should go back, Lido said. He wobbled to his feet. We're not too far gone. With Castro being lenient right now, we wouldn't be punished for leaving. No, Lida, Isabella said. Isabel said. No, as much as she feared the loss of her music and her soul, she couldn't trade that for family. She grabbed Lito and held him back. Don't! We can't go back. They'll arrest Papi. Panic rose like a distant rumble of thunder in Isabel's ears. But then Ivan and Lito both looked up like they could hear it too. Oh! It wasn't Isabella's fear that shook her deep down in the pit of her stomach. It was an enormous tanker headed right for them. Oh my gosh, what's with these chapters? Always with this explosive ending. A tanker is like a massive military ships. You know, like the ones that are, you know, when you go to the waterfront and they have those two big gray military ships tied up. Those are tankers. So really big.